Welcome to Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. Again, we have Mike Zuzolo, President, President of Global Commodity Analytics, and our top expert here on commodities. We are going to discuss today a lot of about the weather in the U.S., the market sentiment, and many other things. Stay tuned, give us a like if you are liking our program, and please click over the bell for notifications. Mike, this we are having very crazy week with protests around the U.S. I interviewed this week very recognized person in the U.S. He's Scott Shelley, also known as the cow guy. And he told me that the market is based on emotion. The market had very good the first days of the week. So, do you agree with him?
Well, I think the day trader or short-term trader, Luis, is probably very emotional right now. But we tend to get that way this time of year because of the weather. And I think that the issues between the United States and China, and now what's happening in the streets of the United States right now, probably only making that even more an issue. I know for a fact that one of my colleagues in Chicago reported that some of the buildings, the glass in the buildings were broken a couple nights ago. So I think that might be what he's talking about. When I look at the market from a more medium-term perspective, like I tend to do from an analytical perspective, I think we've seen a real shift in the sentiment when it comes to inflation versus deflation. And you and I've talked a lot about this, and a lot about the dollar, and a lot about the real, and a lot about the ruble. And those things are starting to occur where the trade, it would seem to me, and the Financial Times actually had a good article about this earlier in the week. Some of the major banks are now pulling off their long dollar hedges. They're coming out of a safe haven mindset. And I think that safe haven mindset was built mainly upon COVID-19 and the pandemic hurting global demand and the global economy. So even in the midst of these riots and the issues in the United States and this the trade frictions between the United States and China, and what's going on in Europe, and some of the COVID issues in South America that we've talked about, in Latin America, the trade's still taking those safe haven positions off at this point. And I think a big reason that is because of some of the economic data that these banks look at, and also because the European Central Bank, for example, instituted another round of fiscal stimulus and monetary stimulus, and the Trump administration is looking at more direct payments and another stimulus bill to come to the United States citizens and companies as well. So I think the market's really wondering how much all this loose monetary and aggressive fiscal policy is going to work out in the next 6 to 9 months, and they don't feel like they need to be long the dollar anymore. So that's probably what I've seen actually come to fruition and maybe changed in terms of sentiment here recently since we last spoke.
Yeah, a major issue right now, I think that's going to be the weather, because I talked to a farmer, a corn grower from Eureka, Illinois, and he told me that he had a lot of trouble having to replant his crop due to the rains of a couple of weeks ago. And but on the other hand, I talked to some agronomists from South Dakota, and they told me that the drought is not very serious there.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I was also have been on the phone a lot, probably with about a dozen clients in the last week or so, talking about their crop progress and east of the Mississippi River. And if you know the United States at all, the Quad Cities area along the Mississippi where the Iowa-Illinois border is, if you drew a line from there to Toledo at Lake Erie, that is the epicenter, I believe, of where the biggest replanting acres are going on in corn. And even clients as far south as Champaign and East Central Illinois are having to replant. I've talked to clients that sell corn seed. Some of them are actually running out of seed because the replant acres are so large. One client I talked to today in northern Indiana said that his neighbor who sells seed was sending corn seed for replant up towards the Indiana Michigan border by the truckload, by the semi-truckload at this point. And so the numbers that I'm picking up right now in that area that I'm talking about, Luis, is about a 20 to 30% replant area of their corn. And in more than one instance, those clients in that area have said their replant's actually greater than last year during these massive floods that we had in 2019. So a pretty amazing situation. I think you're right on with watching that weather and watching those corn production numbers and whether the USDA picks that up in harvested acres, planted acres, yield. You know, that's something that I think is going to become more and more prominent in the trade as we get towards the acreage report at the end of June, especially if the dollar remains weak. And we can see now that maybe the wheat has caught, that it's now starting to fire up here in terms of prices, and the trade's getting more worried about drought in wheat in the wheat belt here in the United States as well as over in Europe and the Baltics. So some of the things are in line that we've talked about, and we'll see if USDA's report next week knocks some of these things around a little bit and delays them, or whether it actually builds the case for putting more premium in or not.
Yeah, other positive news that could be positive news for the U.S. grower, and that is that the Brazilian real brought some relief with showing strength this week because the Brazilian government issued a bond in U.S. dollars. So the value of Brazil real against the U.S. dollar got closer to 5 than to 6 reais per $1. So that's positive news for the U.S. grower.
That's a real good point about what you said about Brazil, because that just adds to the idea that these governments are pushing a lot of money into the global economy to offset COVID. And I think they really need to. It's obviously dangerous, but the alternative could be and would be probably much, much worse, especially with the Latin American countries like Brazil, Argentina, Mexico. Governments of the world doing what they're doing, I think makes a lot of sense.
Yes, and I received your newsletter. By the way, if you want to read Zuzolo's newsletter, go to globalanalytics.biz, and you are telling your customers about a wheat rally for a long time. Tell us your fundamentals of that.
We found some support from a lot about this over the past few weeks since you and I have been talking. And I think we're also seeing the fundamentals come to pass where not just the United States hard red wheat belt, but also in the European wheat belt and the Baltic wheat belt, we're probably going to be tighter on supplies than we've been used to. Maybe setting our maybe a harvest rally red wheat. Places like Hutchinson, Kansas, which is west of me in the heart of the wheat belt, they're looking at 5 or 6 solid days of 100-degree temperatures at this point and no rain. So I think we'll have a very good quality wheat as far as the what we combine. It'll be good quality because it's usually better when it's very hot out. But I think the yields will be down, and I'd be looking for a very rapid harvest with yields being down, and I think that would help support a continued rally. I think the big thing we got to get through is the USDA report and see if what they do with world wheat stocks, because they really gave us some big numbers last month. But we've seen the wheat really come in and help support the soybeans. And I've gone on record with clients, Luis, and said, I don't think this soybean rally is demand-led. I think it's like you say, the currencies, the Brazilian real, but I don't look for China to buy a lot of soybeans from the United States. I think they've decided to buy some, but they've also said don't buy big quantities. And it's been talked about that they may have as much as an 8-month supply built up of soy meal. They probably have of poultry and probably both soybeans from your country and Brazil and Argentina when it came to April and May shipments. So we're still running 9% below year-to-date exports for U.S. soybeans overall. USDA has us down about 4% for the marketing year, and this week we just turned 39 weeks. So we're running out of time to play catch-up. And I've been telling clients, if we get a good rally, let's go ahead and hedge, especially before that acreage report at the end of June.
Yeah, and we talked a lot about China in recent programs. What can you comment about those most recent developments with the U.S.-China negotiation?
I think the special report that I've referenced to you before, where I talked about China maybe being the most difficult to deal with for the Trump administration between now and the November election, is accurate. I think we've seen actionable items and policy moves by China to show that that is the case. I don't think they want President Trump's second term, and I think they'll be very difficult to deal with. So I would not be expecting them to really give way much the more the Trump administration presses. I think they'll be a lot different, in other words, than they were before phase one trade deal. But I think the market's essentially at this point probably factored in and realized we're not going to be anywhere close to meeting those phase one trade deal numbers. And I was one of the people that thought we really could meet those numbers given their pork needs and their soy needs and even their ethanol needs. But they've really been able to withstand the pressure, and I would see them probably continuing to be as difficult as possible before the November elections.
Yes, and you've talked a lot about the summer driving season, the summer grilling season. I think you love these terms. And I think probably we are going to get a good driving season. Universal Studios, Disney are reopening right now. And I would like to comment about that, the impacts on ethanol demand, and finally an analysis about all of these, how that would result for U.S. cattle ranchers and dairy farmers.
Yeah, thank you for asking that, because I do think we're really walking a tightrope. We have had a good start. Memorial Day was a good start for both grilling and for the driving. The riots and the COVID resurgent possibility is very much a concern of mine, Luis. And as we've talked about before, I did the July 4th holiday, and that's where I'll reevaluate a lot, is on the July 4th holiday. But if we would happen to slow down in demand and consumption, it would not surprise me, because the rioting and the protesting are hitting the areas that need to bring back the consumption the most, the cities, the urban areas where the meat consumption is the greatest, and the eating out consumption and the having fun and the recreational dollars, tourism dollars. These are key to our commodity market demand fundamentals at the end result, or in the final analysis, I should say. So livestock producers, I'm very nervous for right now. We still have an elevated retail extra COVID fee to serve you. We can't get to full capacity in many of these restaurants, and so I think that we really are on, like I said, a very tight holiday is big for me to see if we're still on track. But as you say, ethanol right now remains the same. In fact, in terms of increasing, Our production levels here in the United States are now almost back to 50% of where they were when we had the highs back in January, February of production of over 1 billion gallons a day. So
Mike Zuzolo from Edson, Kansas. He is really, really close to the Missouri River.